we seldom hear British historians talk about this. And it's Britain's responsibility towards Palestine. But I have this great opportunity talking to you right now as a well-respected, well-acclaimed British historian. What is Britain's responsibility towards Palestine in 2025? Like, what is it today?
So, I mean, to lay it out very simply, in 1917,
Yes.
Lloyd George, who had never been to Palestine, plus his Secretary of State, Arthur Balfour, who had never been to Palestine, neither of whom had indeed much grasp of what was going on anywhere in the Middle East.
And we're talking at a point when the British got Jerusalem from the Ottomans, basically.
So in 1917, the British army is coming up from Egypt. There are 3 battles of Gaza, which again I think is a forgotten bit of history. In 2 of them, the British faced the same Turkish army that had defeated them at Gallipoli, many of the same regiments, many of the same men. And the Ottomans knocked the British back twice in 1917, just south of Gaza, in Khan Yunis actually, where the fighting is going on now. It's only on the 3rd attempt, when the general is replaced by Allenby, and Allenby in the end basically goes round via Beersheba, surrounds Gaza and outflanks the Ottomans, that the Ottoman lines are broken. The British take Jerusalem. And
I think there was a quote at that point where it's the Prime Minister at the time said Christmas came early or
exactly.
something like that, right? Yeah.
And I think it's about 2 weeks after the battle, after Beersheba had been taken, after Jerusalem had been captured, that the Balfour Declaration is issued. When not even the whole of Palestine has yet been captured, it's still, I think, Ottoman troops in the north. The battles are still raging and the Ottomans are in retreat, but they're not defeated yet. At that point, Arthur Balfour, the Foreign Secretary, releases the Balfour Declaration, promising a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Apparently oblivious, these guys had never been there, to the fact that this was a land with 1 million people living in it already, of whom the Jewish population, which had been there for centuries, and there were areas like Jerusalem and Safed which were deeply Jewish, and Hebron, where there were old Jewish communities, but they were only 10% of the population. Another 10% was Christian, and 80% was Muslim. Those Palestinians were a wide mix of different peoples: ancient Canaanites, ancient Philistines, Arabs who'd arrived in the 7th century, Turks who had come subsequently. Some of the Palestinian Christians have Crusader blood, have Byzantine blood. They were a Levantine people, as people all over the Middle East were, with very mixed ethnicities. Apologists for Israel often give the impression, ignorant of their history, that the Palestinians arrived in the Arab Islamic conquests of the 7th century. That conquest was only a warrior elite, and it only changed the rulers. The people who were tilling the soil, living on the olive groves, farming their land, were the people that had been there in and out. Many of them were previously of the Jewish faith, as well as those who were still practicing the Jewish faith. Many Jews converted to Christianity in the Byzantine period, others later converted to Islam. But the population of Palestine, right up until the Crusades, was majority Christian. And it's only towards the 14th, 15th and 16th centuries that you get a clear Muslim majority. And at the turn of the century, I'd say about 10% Jewish population, 10% Christian, 80% Muslim, all with very mixed blood, as was true all over the Levant. If you went to Alexandria, if you went to Beirut, if you went to Izmir, Smyrna, you would find again these very mixed populations from a wide variety of different ethnic groups, all intermarrying, all living together, all operating under different systems, and an incredible amount of coexistence. And I think it's very important to point to that too, that between Jewish Palestinians and Muslim Palestinians and Christian Palestinians, if you read the folklore of the period, you find that many of them share sacred spaces. So, for example, there was a church in Bet Sahor where the Jewish population came and paid homage to the prophet Elias, the Muslims to Khizr, and the Christians to King George. By the time I got there in the 1980s, the Jewish population had been separated off and become part of Israel, while the Christians and the Muslims shared this sacred space still. And I saw Muslims coming to this Christian church and offering sheep for sacrifice to Kizzer, but the priest took them on the basis that Kizzer was the same as St. George. So there's this deeply integrated history of Muslim, Christian and Jew living together. It wasn't always complete peace. It was the Ottoman Empire was a turbulent equilibrium. And occasionally there are moments such as the Damascus massacres in the 1880s when you get inter-communal fighting. But by and large, these peoples lived side by side, lived together in a measure of peace and coexistence. And there's a whole Palestinian history that, if you look in Ottoman travel accounts, is there, which has been completely erased from the record. So, for example, in the 16th century, there's an Ottoman traveller called Evliya Çelebi. He visits Palestine and he gives an extensive account of the prosperity of this land, of the many rich cities, of the orange growing, of the olives, of the farmland, of the many Sufi shrines and Sufi brotherhoods which he visits in Jerusalem, and so there is a whole mixed Levantine world, as complex and
a lot of it is in your book.
This is very much what I was writing about when I was researching From the Holy Mountain.
Yeah.
As mixed and as porous and as closely interwoven with each other, like a very complicated textile where different strands of different colours are woven into one whole. And what you see all over the Middle East as ideas of nationalism spreads in the 19th century are these closely woven fabrics being torn apart. So the Greeks rise up against the Ottomans and expel the Muslims from there. There are attempts to create an Armenian state which end up in an Armenian genocide. There are attempts to create national units which were very different from the mixed and cosmopolitan populations which existed in Ottoman times. And the most severe, I mean, there are several mass slaughters and mass evictions. The Armenian genocide of 1915 is one. The Smyrna massacres of 1923, 23 is another. But the Nakba, which took place at the very last days of the British Mandate, when well-armed Jewish underground are fighting against and expelling Palestinian villagers from their homes and farms. And these are the grandparents and the great-grandparents of the kids whose tents are being burnt in Gaza today. That little girl we saw on our mobile phones last week trying to get out of that burning building, those kids being burnt alive in their tents the week before, all these horrors that we see every week delivered to us, filmed by people and brought into the world, often through Middle East Eye and Al Jazeera, and very rarely by the mainstream media. These are the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren of the people kicked out of their homes in 1948. And the British did nothing, didn't lift a finger to protect these people. All they were worried about was pulling their troops out as safely as they could.
So you're bringing it back to the Britain's responsibility.
This is all a very long answer to Britain's responsibility. Yes.
It's like I'm watching a lecture, but I'm loving it.
Watching a very rambling.
No, not at all, not at all. I'm learning lots, but I think just to put it in shorter terms for that specific answer, like if I were to say, I'm trying to, we now get a good glimpse of the history, but if from a historian's perspective and someone like yourself, this idea of Britain's responsibility, when we hear the off time, we hear some politician raising it, it's not common, but when it does come up, what does it mean in your view?
Well, I don't think the Palestinians would either be being bombed in Gaza today or even be in Gaza rather than in their homes in the Galilee if the British had not interfered in that country in 1917. If the policy...
You're tying it to that far back.
Absolutely. And if the mandate had not encouraged, as the Balfour Declaration says, Jewish immigration into this land that was already full of a people with their own traditions, their own food, their own dress sense, their own textiles and so on. If the British had not then abandoned the Palestinians in 1917 and then gone on to provide diplomatic support consistently for the Israelis ever since. There have been moments when British governments have thrown up their hands at what the Israelis were doing. And I think the modern Tory party have forgotten that Mrs. Thatcher, in fact, banned arms sales to the Israelis, for example, during their very bloody assault on Lebanon in the 1980s.
Yeah.
That seems to have been forgotten in the Tory party memory. We see Kemi Badenoch now spreading deeply Islamophobic myths about how the Israelis are somehow fighting a proxy war on our behalf. I mean, what is she saying? Is she subscribing to some sort of millennial evangelical Christian belief that there's a massive war of Islam against the Christian world? Because I hope that's not what she's saying, but that seems to be the sort of language she's coming up with now.